Well, good day. This is going to be shading and borders, shading around paragraphs, borders around paragraphs. Here's a typical little article somebody wrote. It's single spaced and it looks kind of boring. They probably could have spruced it up a little bit if they would have shaded in the paragraphs. Maybe it looks something like this. At least I would be more tempted to read it if it looked shaded in like this. Now, hey, you don't have to shade in every single paragraph, but you can do things to make your article look a little more interesting. Maybe they could have put it in columns like this. Well, let's learn how to do paragraph shading. So we'll go back to the original one. It looks like this. I know you can't read the whole thing, so let's zoom in a bit so you can look at it. We'll look at the page width. And if you want to shade in a paragraph, it's going to be important to highlight the paragraph marker. Remember that paragraph marker that's on the end? You're going to see it if you go to the home and find under the paragraph group the show hide button. And sure enough, there's the little paragraph marker. So if you want to do the entire paragraph, you have to hit that paragraph marker. Let's highlight this first entire paragraph. How do you highlight a paragraph really fast? That's right, triple click the paragraph, and I'm going to change the shading of this paragraph, and that's here with using the bucket. And the bucket's on the paragraph group. You give it a click and you choose a color, maybe this color, give it a click. Hey, you did it. Now the next one I'm going to do is two paragraphs, both the underlined paragraph and the next paragraph. It's not important that you highlight the entire paragraph if you've hit one of the paragraph markers. Remember that paragraph marker is going to be right after that underline. There it is. And once you hit one, you don't have to hit them all. So I'm not going to have to do this whole second paragraph, just this much. I'll go back to the bucket and I'll change the paragraph shading. Maybe I'll choose this purple one. Looks pretty good. Let's do the next one. We'll highlight. You don't have to get the entire second paragraph. If you get any part of the second paragraph, Word will understand what you're doing. And maybe we'll change it to this green color maybe. Looks good. And on you go. Let's change it back to the whole page. One page. Looks pretty good. And you can just keep going. Now if you wanted to put it in columns, you know how to do that. You click just before the first paragraph and you highlight to the end of the document. And if you want to do paragraphs, that's under page layout. Head for page layout. Under page layout is columns. You want two columns. And that looks pretty good. Hey, you can move on and shade in all the rest if you want. Let's move on to borders. Here's an example of an article I typed up, and I was trying to get people to pay attention to these four paragraphs here near the bottom. So I indented them both sides, and I thought, well, maybe I can do even more than that. I'll highlight all four paragraphs, and I'm going to put a big box around them. The big box around them is here on the Home tab in the paragraph group, and sure enough, there's a borders button. You can say you want borders just on the bottom, or just on the top, or just on the left, or just on the right, and there's lots and lots of choices. Let's put a border on the bottom. We'll click this border button again, and we'll say I want one on the top as well. Let's see how that looks. Does that sort of draw attention to my four paragraphs? I think it kind of does. It's not too bad. Let's put a big thick border around the entire thing, a box. And so I'll highlight all four because that's the ones I want my border to be around. And instead of choosing one of these presets, I'll go down here to the bottom that says borders and shading. I'll give it a click. It'll give me a little dialog box of borders and also shadings up here. I could have, instead of using the bucket, I guess I could have come up here to shading and filled in the shading colors, but hey, I just used the bucket. So for the borders, what you want to do is say, hey, I want a box that goes all the way around. It says, what kind of box do you want? A little thin box or a little thick box? Do you want a dashed box? Maybe, you know what? I'm going to choose that steady thin one, and I'll just change the width down here, and I'll say I want it pretty thick. What color do you want? You know what? I think I'll make it red. And over here on the preview, I'll take off the left and I'll take off the right. And now the preview says I'm going to put a thick line at the top, I'm going to put a thick line at the bottom, they're going to be red lines. Always watch the preview. Click OK, and poof! Hey, how's that look? Well, it looks okay. It doesn't look great. Let's highlight those four again. I'll highlight these four again. I'm going to try to make a border that looks a little better. I'll look at my borders and shading. I'm going to try this shadow box. I saw this shadow box, and I don't need to have a red shadow. I think a automatic color's fine. Not too thick, and for a shadow box, the lines are going to be a little bit thinner on the top and on the left. They're going to be a little bit thicker on the right and on the bottom. I'll say okay and see how that looks. Hey, let's zoom in on that and see what it looks like. I think it looks pretty good. What do you think? Well, most of the time you're not going to be putting borders around boxes in the middle of your text. Let's look at some more practical examples of when you would use borders around paragraphs. Here's an example of a newsletter, and at the top of the newsletter it says Volume 1, it says Quarterly News Report. You sort of get the idea this is a newsletter, something that might come out once a month. Let's change the zoom to page width so you can sort of see the top. And I want to put lines across this masthead, so I'm going to highlight this masthead line. I'll go to the Home tab and I'm going to put borders around it. It'll remember the borders that I did before. So if I do bottom and then I go back and I do top, he'll use whatever style I used before. Those were the thick ones that I used on. And that looks pretty good to me. Maybe I'll highlight these again and I'll go to the border styles again. Borders and shading, it gives me my little box. That looks alright. Maybe I'll change the style down here and I'll think maybe I want a thick line at the top like this, and I'll say okay, I want that one and I want it on the top, and then I want this one and I want it on the bottom. You see how it works? You choose what you want and you put it where you want it to go. So I have a nice one on the top, I have a nice one on the bottom. Looks good to me. I'm going to say okay, and hey, there it is. That looks pretty nice. Let's look at another example. Well, here's a typical example of a letterhead. This one's from the Compass Travel Group, and it looks kind of boring. So I thought I'd highlight this last line and I'll put a border around it. The border will only be on the bottom though. So give this one a click. I'll say I want a bottom border, and it looks like that. Hey, that looks a lot better. Let's look at another example. Well, here's an example of another newsletter. It looks like a newsletter that comes out maybe quarterly, and the masthead doesn't have any line. There's no line between the masthead at the top and the articles underneath. So let's switch to page width and we'll fix that up. I'll highlight this line of the masthead and I'm going to put border around it. So I'll go to the Home tab, I'll go to the borders and shading. Let's go down to those borders and shading options, and you work this dialog box from left to right. You say I want a box, then it says what kind of a line do you want for that box, and I'll scroll down and find a style that I like. Maybe I like the wavy line style, maybe I want it to be a different color. I'll change it to maybe a purple color, and I'll decide I only want those wavy lines on the left. Oh, nope, I only want them on the top and the bottom, not on the left and not on the right. Looks good to me. Always watch your preview. This is what it's going to look like, and okay. So to me, that looks pretty interesting. One more thing you might want to do is you might shade in an entire article to try to draw attention to a certain article. Let's look at the whole page real quick, and I think I'll take this article on the right and I'll highlight the entire article from the heading all the way down to the bottom, and let's shade it in. I'll go to Home and I'll find, wait a minute, where's shading? How do you shade stuff in? Which button is for shading? Oh yeah, it's the bucket. So I'll go to the bucket and I'll choose some color that'll work nice, that might Xerox nicely, maybe this peach color. Give it a click, and hey, how does that look? I think that looks pretty good. Well, that's about all there is to it.